At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFI without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. Of all the galaxy's horrors, none could make a room of aliens panic quite like the sound of an earth animal that humans put on coffee mugs. The most terrifying sound in the known galaxy, according to Professor Lorem, was a simple two-note hoot. He let the recording play again through the lecture hall's acoustic emitters, a soft, questioning hoo-hoo that rippled through the cavernous space. The effect was immediate and gratifying. The 60 or so non-human students in his Xenobiology 301 course recoiled as one. A gangly Vizian in the front row emitted a series of distressed clicks, his delicate respiratory tendrils quivering. A hulking Grollmod, whose species was rumored to have once wrestled asteroids for sport, actually whimpered and tried to slide his bulk under a desk designed for beings a quarter of his size. The air thickened with the scent of their various fear pheromones, a smell like burnt sugar from the Vizian, and something acrid and oily from the Grollmod. "Observe," Lorem chirped, his own avian features puffed with academic pride. He preened slightly, a subconscious gesture of satisfaction. "The primal physiological response to a Class 5 airborne ambush predator from the human homeworld. The great horned owl. Even a recording triggers the ingrained prey response. A genetic memory of being hunted from a silent sky." He gestured with a slender, three-fingered hand toward the back of the auditorium, where the dozen human exchange students conspicuously failed to exhibit any prey response whatsoever. In fact, one of them actively failed to suppress a laugh. Phelan Croft had his face buried in his hand, his shoulders shaking. Next to him, Carla Roman snorted, leaning over to whisper. "Faye, be serious. They're terrified of Hedwig." Bastian Cole, a man built on a scale that suggested he was carved from a denser type of matter, just seemed bored. He was idly testing the structural integrity of his standard-issue composite desk by lifting one corner a few inches off the floor with one hand. He examined the strain on his joints with a placid curiosity before setting it down without a sound. It was an unconscious habit, an ingrained need to understand the failure points of his immediate environment. "Mr. Croft," Lorem said, his tone dripping with a condescension he cultivated for these moments, "you find the terror of your planet's fauna amusing." Phelan looked up, his face a construction of strained neutrality. "No, Professor, it's just... well, that's an owl. We have them in zoos. Some licensed handlers keep them as exotic pets. My grandmother has a ceramic one in her garden. It's a bit hard to feel a primal terror." The professor's feathery crest ruffled. "A testament to your species. Desensitization. A coping mechanism, no doubt. Your kind has lived so long amidst constant threats, you've developed a callousness to them. Perhaps this will elicit a more appropriate reaction." He flicked a command across his console. A low, guttural growl filled the room, followed by a piercing scream, the sound of a Terran cougar. Carla yawned. "Okay, now that one's a little scary, if you're a deer or a particularly slow jogger." Lorem's posture stiffened. This was not going according to his lesson plan. The humans were supposed to be cautionary tales, living examples of the brutalizing effect of a death world environment. They were meant to serve as a humbling spectacle for the more civilized species of the galaxy. Instead, they treated his meticulously curated archive of galactic horrors like a nature documentary. He decided to skip ahead to his grand finale, the centerpiece of his lecture on predatory dominance. "Very well," he announced, his voice regaining its lecturing authority. "You have demonstrated your species' remarkable fortitude, but the sounds you have heard are from predators that hunt for sustenance. Now allow me to present something truly magnificent. A creature that hunts for dominance." On the main screen, a new audio file appeared, its designation stark and clinical. Acheron, Apex Predator, Territorial.org. "This is a recent, unverified acquisition," Lorem explained, a smug glint in his compound eyes. "It is the challenge broadcast of the dominant predator from a Class 9 world not far from here. Note the complex sonics, the sheer broadcast power. This is the cry of a simple beast. This is a declaration of war." For maximum pedagogical effect, he overrode the lecture hall's acoustic safety limiters. A red warning icon flashed on his console, which he dismissed with an arrogant flick of his finger. "Let us appreciate this at full volume." He tapped the console. The sound that boomed from the emitters was a physical force. It began with a series of deep, guttural clicks that felt less like a noise and more like a vibration in the sternum. A low-frequency rumble followed, a tremor that shook the very foundations of the building. A bass note so profound it felt like the moon itself groaned in agony. Then came the shriek. It was a high-pitched, saw-toothed scream that scraped at the very edge of audible hearing. A sound of pure, intelligent, and unrestrained malice. The sound was a statement, a declaration in a language older than words. "This is my territory. All who hear this will submit or die." In the lecture hall, every non-human was paralyzed. A sea of petrified statues. Even the humans felt a cold spike of adrenaline. The back of Phelan's neck prickled. That sound came from a monster. The sound, dangerously loud, blasted out from the lecture hall and echoed across the central courtyard with brutal clarity. "Now," Professor Lorem began, preening at the sheer terror he had finally induced, "as you can hear..." He was cut off, not by the sound's echo, but by the catastrophic shatter of the courtyard's main window, blowing inward. From a rocky overhang in the canyon wall overlooking the Lyceum, the obsidian Quillfang had been cautiously circling the strange, glowing oasis. Its transport ship was a smoldering wreck behind it. Tranquilizers still fogged the edges of its mind, but the pain from the crash was a sharp, clarifying anchor. A deep puncture wound in its left hind leg throbbed with every careful step. It was wounded, disoriented, and deeply paranoid. The structures hummed with an unnatural energy, a density of life it could sense but not understand. It scouted the perimeter, trying to assess the threat, when the broadcast hit. The sound was an auditory assault, a direct and unmistakable challenge, a rival. Here, inside that specific den of metal and light, its confusion and paranoia vaporized, flash-fired into pure focused rage. Its powerful hind legs bunched, and it launched itself toward the source of the broadcast. The 30-foot perimeter fence, designed to keep students from wandering into the barren lunar landscape, was an inconvenience. It cleared it in a single fluid leap. Back in the lecture hall, the professor's pontificating was silenced as a 600-kilogram mass of corded muscle and black keratinous armor crashed through the window. It landed with a ground-shaking thud that cracked the decorative flagstones. It was a biochemical nightmare, a fusion of saber-toothed cat and wolverine scaled up to the size of a ground car. A bristling mane of sharp, bony quills ran down its spine, and its eyes glowed with an infrared heat that promised murder. Its gaze was fixed on the lecture hall, the origin point of the challenge it had come to answer. It opened its maw, lined with teeth like shards of volcanic glass, and unleashed its own roar. The sound was a living, breathing force that shattered every remaining window in the building and turned the blood of every alien student to ice. Pandemonium was a quiet, orderly affair compared to the chaos that erupted. Campus-wide lockdown alarms blared, a useless siren wailing over the creature's furious roars. A sleek, white security droid rolled into the courtyard, its synthesized voice a beacon of futile regulations in the face of primal fury. "Warning," it droned. "You have entered a restricted zone. Please cease your current activity and await instruction." The Quillfang moved in a blur of black armor and coiled muscle. It bisected the droid with a single swipe of a clawed forelimb, sending sparks and hydraulic fluid spraying across the cracked pavement. The droid's upper torso, still functional, hit the ground and continued its announcement to a wall. "Cease and desist immediately. Non-compliance will be met with non-lethal force." 8 more droids converged, their stun bolt cannons whining as they charged. The bolts, designed to incapacitate an unruly student, sizzled harmlessly against the creature's thick hide. The Quillfang grabbed one droid and used it as a shield. The machine's chassis absorbed the ineffective blue energy blast. Then it tore the droid in half and threw the pieces at the others, dismantling the entire security squad in less than 10 seconds. Their programming was a logic loop of de-escalation against an entity whose only logic was annihilation. The automated defense system, the pride of the safe and sterile Lyceum, went silent, replaced by the crunch of metal and the dripping of vital fluids. Inside the lecture hall, Professor Lorem was frozen. It was a state of profound, world-shattering shock. The connections fired in his academic brain with horrifying clarity. Unverified acquisition, broadcast at dangerous volume, provoked territorial response. This was an invited guest. He did this. His intellectual vanity, his desire to put the Terrans in their place, had brought this engine of death to their doorstep. The other alien students were a portrait of prey animals, hiding under desks, curled into fetal positions, emitting low, terrified moans. The humans, however, were on their feet. For them, the shock lasted approximately 4 seconds before adrenaline washed it away and replaced it with a cold, clear focus. A conversation was held in the space of a single heartbeat. Phelan met callous eyes, with a slight tilt of his head. Threat confirmed. Calla responded with a near imperceptible widening of her own. Ready. Bastion shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a silent signal of ready to move. The creature's arrival was a problem. Problems had solutions. Phelan scanned the wreckage in the courtyard, his eyes flicking to the flickering campus map on a surviving side screen. The creature was stalking toward the main academic building, its movements stiff. It had a slight limp. "Concord enforcers are stationed at Tranquility Base," Phelan said, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. It was quiet, but it commanded attention. "But the comms are down. That thing's roar must have fried the main relay. They won't even know we're in trouble until the next check-in." He did a quick, grim calculation. Best case, 90 minutes until they figure it out and can drop. He looked at the Quillfang as it shouldered its way through the main entrance of the building opposite them. It's wounded. he analyzed in a low mutter, more to himself than anyone. Left hind leg. But it's smart. It's hunting. It thinks something in here challenged it. He looked at the other 11 humans, who were now all looking at him, their expressions grim but steady. All right. It bleeds. Let's get to work. We can hold up in here, Phelan continued in a low, rapid voice. We need to pull it into the open. Petra, what can you cook up in the labs? Petra Novak's eyes gleamed. Something loud. Something hot. Good. Bastion, we need to hit it hard and slow it down. Kala, how fast are you today? Kala just grinned. Fast enough. All right, Phelan finished, his gaze sweeping over all of them. We draw it out, bleed it, corner it in the courtyard. Go. Professor Lorem finally snapped out of his stupor. He began herding the terrified Vizians and Grolmods toward the back of the lecture hall. Everyone remain calm. Do not display fear. Our predatory species can sense... His voice was drowned out as the humans moved with a chilling, unified purpose. Bastion Cole headed for the athletic supply depot, down the hall. The door was mag-locked for security. Bastion grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher from its wall mount, swung it like a club, and shattered the emergency release panel. Alarms blared, but nobody was paying attention to a simple break-in anymore. He emerged a minute later, his arms laden. He tossed aluminium alloy baseball bats to 2 other students, carbon fiber lacrosse sticks, light, strong, and with a hooked end, to 3 more. Trophy case, he grunted, pointing toward the main lobby. Another student, a quiet girl named Chloe, wordlessly understood. She ran to the shattered display which housed the Lyceum's Grav Ball Championship Awards and begun carefully collecting the largest, sharpest shards of reinforced glass. Meanwhile, Petra Novak was sprinting in the opposite direction, toward the chemistry wing. The main lab door was a slab of reinforced steel, sealed by powerful electromagnets. Beside it, under a thin plasteel cover, was a large, red manual release lever. A sign above it read in stark, universal symbols: Emergency Venting and Access, Manual Override. Petra didn't hesitate. She shattered the cover with her elbow. The sharp crack echoed in the hallway. She wrenched the heavy lever down with both hands. Campus alarms, already wailing, were joined by a new, high-pitched klaxon as the heavy door hissed open. She slipped inside. She was in a sanctuary of potential energy. She ignored the expensive spectrographs and gene sequences and headed straight for a raw chemical storage lockers. Powdered magnesium, potassium permanganate, sulfur, a canister of industrial-grade cleaning solvents with a glycerol base. She wasn't making bombs. Bombs were messy and imprecise. She was making tools for a very specific job. They moved through the eerily silent campus halls, no longer students, but a hunting party. The only sounds were the soft footsteps on the polished floors, the distant crash of the Quillfang destroying university property, and the faint, terrified whimpers of aliens barricaded in their dorms. They tracked the beast by its trail of destruction, deep gouges in the titanium walls, the mangled husks of cleaning and maintenance drones, their optical sensors dark. Phelan led the way, using hand signals he'd learned mapping frontier worlds with his surveyor parents. A closed fist held high. Halt. Sound. A quick flick of his fingers. Advance. Spread out. A slow downward wave. Get low. Another human, a lanky boy named Liam, pointed to the floor. A trail of viscous, opalescent fluid glistened under the emergency lighting. Blood. Bastion saw it, and with a silent gesture of his own, a quick 2-finger chop towards the parallel corridor. He split his team without a word. To the few aliens peering from behind reinforced viewport windows, it was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. The monster was a force of nature, a thing of mindless rage, but the humans were coordinated. They were quiet and their eyes held a look of cold, predatory focus that was somehow more frightening than the beast's glowing stare. They were stalking the monster. Carla, moving with the preternatural silence of someone who spent their weekends doing parkour on high-rise buildings, was their scout. She ghosted ahead of the main group, a carbon fiber lacrosse stick held like a spear. Peeking around a corner, she spotted it. The Quillfang was in the central library, a cavernous multi-level atrium filled with towering shelves of data slates and old-fashioned paper books. It seemed confused, agitated. It was sniffing at the strange cellulose-filled objects, its massive head twitching as it tried to locate the scent of its challenger. She relayed its position back through her comm bead. A whisper of information. Library, ground floor. It's distracted. Phelan's voice came back, calm and steady. Copy. Bastion. Positions. The plan was relayed in clipped, concise fragments. On Phelan's signal, Bastion and 3 other humans on the balcony overlooking the main floor put their shoulders to a massive, freestanding shelving unit. It was a dense metal frame equipped with hard light displays, weighing at least a ton. With coordinated guttural heave, they shoved it over the railing. It fell with a thunderous boom and crashed down directly onto the Quillfang's back. For a second, it looked like it had worked. The beast was pinned. But then, with a roar of pure fury, it heaved upward. The metal frame bent and buckled. It shredded the wreckage and flung shattered data slates and torn books across the room. The ambush wasn't a failure. As the beast tore itself free, Carla saw a deep, fresh gash on its flank where a sheared edge of the shelf had sliced through its armor. More importantly, they had confirmed 2 things. It could be hurt, and it could be corralled for a moment. The beast freed itself faster than any of them had anticipated, its roar echoing with pain and rage. Fall back, Phelan's voice commanded over the comms. Phase 2 location, move. The humans executed a planned retreat. They fell back through the library's emergency exit, making for a defensible choke point. Phelan had identified on the schematics the main quantum physics laboratory. It had a reinforced door designed to contain small-scale reality warping experiments. It would hold, hopefully. They slammed the heavy door shut just as the Quillfang's claws scraped against the other side. Bastion ripped a 200-pound decorative metal sculpture of a stylized atom from its moorings in the hallway, and with a grunt of immense effort, wedged it against the doorframe. The metal groaned, but held. Inside, they caught their breath, the sound of the beast's frustrated snarling muffled by the thick door. Liam was bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm, a near miss from a flying piece of shelving. Petra was already on it, pulling a medical kit from a wall panel and applying a biofoam sealant. In a corner of the lab, Professor Lorem was huddled with a few alien students who had been trapped in the science wing. He was trembling, his data pad clutched in his shaking hands as he recited from a file he downloaded. "De-escalation mantra for frightened fauna," he muttered, his clicks and whistles weak with fear. "Calm thoughts. Project calm energies. A peaceful spirit deters aggression." Carla rolled her eyes, panting from the sprint. Well, that didn't work. The library trap was a bust. We can't pin it. It's too damn strong. Phelan was staring at the schematic of the campus still displayed on his data pad. He ignored Lorem's useless chanting. "You're right," he said, his eyes tracking the labyrinth of corridors and open spaces. "We can't trap it." He looked up, his gaze locking into Carla. A plan was forming, cold and brutal and logical. "So we heard it." He zoomed in on the creature's current location, then traced a path through the campus towards the open-air athletic fields. It's still hunting its rival. Its territorial instincts are overriding its tactical caution. It's wounded, angry, and looking for a target. He looked at Carla again, a silent question in his eyes. Its instincts will make a chase if the prey is tempting enough. Feel like a run? Carla's face broke into a grin. It was a feral, terrifying, adrenaline-fueled smile that showed all her teeth. "Only always," she breathed. The plan was set in under a minute. A rapid-fire exchange of tactical shorthand. Carla found what she needed in the lab's wreckage. A curved metal panel from a destroyed diagnostic droid, and a short length of titanium pipe. She slipped out a side maintenance hatch and circled around to the main concourse. A moment later, a new sound echoed through the silent campus. A rhythmic, metallic clang, clang, clang. It was a simple noise laden with predatory significance. The sound of something heavy being dragged. The sound of a wounded thing, struggling to move, trying to flee. Inside the library, the Quillfang's head snapped up, its ears complex structures of cartilage and sensory nodes, swiveled, pinpointing the source of the sound with chilling accuracy. All its tactical caution, all its confusion, vanished. It was replaced by the pure, undiluted instinct of an apex predator that has found a weak and injured rival. The hunt for the challenger was back on. It abandoned its attempts to breach the lab door and charged toward the sound. A dead sprint through the heart of the galactic Lyceum followed. Carla was a blur of motion, the metal panel she dragged behind her clanging and scraping. A perfect auditory lure. The air she gasped was thick with the coppery scent of the creature's own blood. The vibration of its pursuit thrummed up through the soles of her boots. She led it on a perfectly calculated route, a gauntlet planned by Phelan to maximize damage and exhaustion. She vaulted over barricades of overturned furniture, slid through the narrow gaps between service conduits, and felt the rush of wind as she cleared a closing blast door by inches. She never stopped moving, never stopped making noise, and never stopped taunting the monster hot on her heels. "'Tis slow, ugly. My grandma could chase me faster than that, and she uses a walker." As she rounded the corner into the cafeteria, she tapped her comm bead twice, a staccato signal for "target is committed," and poured on the speed. The Quillfang barreled through the doors and smashed them off their hinges. Inside, Bastion and his team unleashed hell. Vats of boiling hot beige protein-rich gel, the galaxy's most bland and ubiquitous foodstuff, were hurled, splashing across the creature's head and chest. It roared in pain and surprise as the thick, steaming goo clung to its hide. Bastion braced himself, the improvised bat feeling flimsy in his grip. He could smell the creature's foul breath, a scent like burnt metal and rotten meat. As it charged, he didn't swing at the creature. He swung at the small cylinder Petra had given him, batting it through the air like a grav puck. It landed directly in front of the creature's face and detonated with a blinding white flash and a deafening crack. The Quillfang, already in pain, was now disoriented and half-blinded. It slashed wildly, its massive claws flailing in a blind rage. Chloe, the student who had been collecting glass shards, was being pulled back behind the kitchen line by a friend when one of the wild slashes caught her across the shoulder. It was a glancing blow that would have disemboweled her if it had been a direct hit. She cried out in pain, but was swiftly dragged to safety behind the reinforced steel of the serving counter. The attack had drawn first blood from their side. The hunt was no longer a game. From the rooftop of the administration building, Petra Novak and her team provided fire support. They had a perfect vantage point over the central quad, the next stage of Carla's deadly marathon. As the creature, limping heavily and shaking its head to clear its vision, stumbled into the open, Petra went to work. She spoke like a chemist titrating a volatile solution, her voice a low, excited mutter. Potassium permanganate and glycerin, 3-to-1 ratio, accounting for wind shear, exothermic reaction in T-3, 2, 1. She hurled a glass beaker. It shattered on the ground just to the creature's right. A split second later, the mixture erupted in a slick of brilliant, violet fire. Not an explosion, but an intense, localized burn. The Quillfang shrieked and leaped away from the flames, directly into the path Phelan had intended. As Carla sprinted past the burning patch, she felt the wave of heat wash over her back. From his own vantage point in a shattered second-story window, Professor Lorem watched, his jaw agape in stunned disbelief. He was a xenobiologist. He studied animal behavior. He believed he was witnessing chaos, a panicked, disorganized response from a group of terrified hominids. He now understood how catastrophically wrong he was. Croft didn't shout orders. He made a sharp two-note whistle from his position. Down below, Roman, without a moment's hesitation, broke left, leading the beast toward the athletics fields. Cole answered from the cafeteria with a low grunt that echoed strangely in the open space, and two other humans instantly shifted their position to cover the new opening. Bats held ready. It was a language, a bloody, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient language of the hunt he had never known existed. He wasn't watching students, he was witnessing a pack. They had done it. They had successfully driven the Quillfang back to where it all began, the central courtyard in front of the lecture hall. But this time, it was wounded, exhausted, and trapped. The exits were blocked by fire and debris. The humans took up their positions and formed a loose, menacing circle. Phelan jogged over to Bastian and Carla, who were panting, their faces streaked with grime and nutrient gel. "The roof of the lecture hall," he said, pointing up at the ruined facade. "High ground. Final play." He looked at Bastian. "Give me a boost. Keep it occupied until you hear my signal." Bastian didn't question it. He linked his massive hands together, forming a stirrup. Phelan stepped into them with a single explosive grunt. Bastian launched him 10 feet into the air. Phelan grabbed hold of a dangling power conduit, his fingers finding purchase on the mangled plasteel. Carla was already there, uncoiling a length of high tensile cabling she'd salvaged from a destroyed droid and tossing him the end. He caught it and began to climb. Below, the entire human cohort emerged from cover. There were a dozen of them. Chloe leaned against a pillar, one arm held tight to her bandaged shoulder, a sharp lacrosse stick held ready in her good hand. They were bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted, but their eyes, fixed on the cornered beast, were alight with a unified predatory focus that burnt brighter than any fear. The final battle was an execution. Carla and the flankers darted in, feint right, lunge left, keep it turning. They used the yips and barks Lorem had heard earlier, a constant stream of positional data. Bastian's team was the wall, a tide of aggression. Advance, retreat. They didn't aim to kill, they aimed to bleed, to exhaust, to set the stage. They used the environment, the shattered statues and overturned planters, forcing the beast to expend its final reserves of energy in futile, rage-fueled lunges. The Quilfang, its tactical mind eroded by pain and rage, finally locked onto what it perceived as the biggest threat, Bastion, the huge, unmovable object that always seemed to be in its way. It ignored the darting figures at its periphery and gathered its powerful hind legs for one last, desperate lunge. It was going to tear the big one apart. This was the signal. A sharp two-note whistle, the same one Lorem had heard before, cut through the air from the rooftop above. The pack's trap sprang shut. Carla and another student had been waiting for this exact moment. They threw a weighted cargo net they dragged from the supply depot, aiming not for its body but for its hind legs. The net caught it mid-lunge, the weights tangling around its ankles and throwing its trajectory completely off. It stumbled and crashed to the ground with an ungraceful, heavy thud. Simultaneously, Bastion stepped forward. He was the hammer. He swung his bat, the one Chloe had painstakingly embedded with razor-sharp glass shards, with all his might. It connected with the side of the creature's head. With a sickening crunch, the beast's world exploded in a starburst of pain. It was stunned, disoriented, its armored neck exposed at a vulnerable angle for a precious second. This was not a feat of one person's strength. It was the culmination of the pack's perfect, bloody symphony. From the roof, Phelan swung down. He had anchored the cable to a support beam. He held their final weapon, a makeshift spear crafted from the snapped-off flagpole that had once displayed the Lyceum's banner. Its high tensile alloy had fractured into a jagged, razor-sharp point. Phelan was just the delivery mechanism for physics. Gravity and momentum did the work. He slammed into the creature's exposed neck, and the sharpened alloy pole, backed by his body weight and the arc of his swing, punched through armored plates, muscle, and spine with a wet, final shearing sound. The Quilfang gave one last, shuddering roar. It was a strange, gurgling sound, an eerie, dying echo of the territorial call Professor Lorem had so arrogantly broadcast. Then it collapsed, its glowing eyes fading to a dull, lifeless, cherry red. A profound silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the ragged, desperate breathing of the human students. They converged on the body, their makeshift weapons held loosely at their sides. The hunt was over. From the shattered doorways and windows of the surrounding buildings, the alien students and faculty began to emerge. They stared at the scene, the dead monster, the exhausted humans, with a look of utter, reverent disbelief. Professor Lorem stumbled out into the courtyard, his feathery crest completely flat against his skull. He looked at the corpse, then at the bloodied, panting college students who had killed it. How? He stammered, his voice a series of weak, incredulous clicks. How did you... The regulations of the droids, how did you know what to do? Phelan wrenched the flagpole from the creature's neck. He leaned on it like a staff, his body trembling with post-adrenaline fatigue. He looked Lorem dead in the eye. We've been hunting things bigger and meaner than this since we learned how to walk upright, he panted. You think we survived Earth by accident? The heavily armed Galactic Concord enforcers finally arrived 15 minutes later. They stormed the courtyard in a clatter of power armor and plasma rifles, expecting to find a massacre. They found a dozen exhausted, bleeding college students. The enforcer captain, a massive four-armed Gorvan with a face like a granite cliff, took in the scene. He saw Petra Novak expertly applying a high-tech biofoam patch to Chloe's shoulder. He saw the improvised weapons, the glass-studded bats, the sharpened lacrosse sticks, the chemical burns on the flagstones, and he saw the body of the obsidian Quilfang, a creature that a full squad of his own troops would have hesitated to engage. He saw Phelan, leaning on his bloody flagpole spear, surrounded by his pack. The Gorvin captain slowly, deliberately lowered the muzzle of his plasma rifle. His second-in-command, a younger Gorvin, stared in disbelief. "Captain, they killed it! With that!" The captain didn't take his eyes off the humans. "They're Terrans," he growled. "From Earth. Class 12 Death World." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the coordinated carnage one last time. "Son, I think we have it backwards." The news, despite official attempts to classify the incident report, spread through the galactic networks. Personal logs, shaky vid captures from terrified onlookers, and breathless testimonies painted a picture that was both horrifying and awe-inspiring. The entry for humanity in the official xenological database was quietly updated. Gone were the condescending remarks about their chaotic social structures. They were replaced with terms like unprecedented pack coordination, hyper-lethal adaptability, and Class A threat response capability. But the most significant change was a formal addendum attached to the Lyceum's lead researcher, a shaken and profoundly humbled Professor Lorem. It was submitted to the Concord Xenological Council and became required reading in every military and first contact academy in the galaxy. Excerpt from the official addendum to the Galactic Concord Xenological Database file on Homo sapiens, submitted by Professor Lorem of the Galactic Lyceum. I have amended my lectures. The prevailing theory was that humanity was shaped by its hostile homeworld. I now believe this to be fundamentally incorrect. Looking at the coordinated savagery, the instinctual teamwork, the non-verbal language of violence I witnessed, one question becomes terrifyingly clear. Is Earth a death world because it is inherently lethal, or is a death world because they are on it? That question echoed through the sterile quiet of the Lyceum's infirmary, an unspoken thought hanging in the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and ozone. The dozen human students were scattered across medical berths, a tableau of the aftermath. Carla was arguing with a medical droid that insisted she remain still, a wide, triumphant grin on her face as she recounted her sprint for the 5th time. Bastian sat on the edge of a berth, silently examining the remains of his glass-studded bat. The bored placidity was gone from his eyes, replaced by a look of critical, satisfied assessment, as if he'd finally found a problem worthy of his strength. Across the room, Chloe winced as a biofoam patch sealed the gash on her shoulder. But her gaze was steady, her expression proud. She met Phelan's eye and gave a small, firm nod. She hadn't been a liability. She had held the line. The Enforcer captain entered, his massive frame filling the doorway. He surveyed the scene, his granite face unreadable. He stopped by Bastian and picked up a piece of the shattered bat. My official report will note the use of unconventional tactics and improvised environmental weaponry, he growled, his voice a low rumble. We just call it gym class, Carla quipped from her bed, earning a tired smirk from the captain. He tossed the shard back onto the table and looked at Phelan. The Lyceum is in your debt. The Concord is taking notes. With a final respectful nod that spoke more than words ever could, he turned and left. A moment later, a more hesitant figure appeared in the doorway. Professor Lorem. He was no longer the puffed-up academic. His feathery crest was flat, his posture stooped. He looked at the collected students, no longer a chaotic curiosity, but a lethal, unified whole. He approached Phelan's berth, his 3-fingered hands clasped nervously. I have been reviewing the security footage, Lorem began, his voice a series of humbled clicks. You were not just fighting, you were a single organism, a hunt.
I have never seen anything like it among a sentient species. Is that all your species is? The perfect predator?"
Phelan looked away from the professor and let his gaze fall upon his pack. He saw Petra showing Liam the precise chemical burns on a piece of the Gravemore's armor she'd salvaged. He saw Kala laughing. He saw Bastian finally setting the broken bat down, his duty done. He saw Chloe, injured but unbroken. He turned back to the terrified and awestruck professor. "You've only seen half the equation," Phelan said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire day. "You saw what we do to a monster when it threatens our home, when it hurts our own." He gestured around the room with his chin. "But you weren't there when we were learning to walk in a world that tried to kill us. So we learned to build shelters that could withstand it. You didn't see us figure out how to grow food in stubborn soil, so we learned to cooperate. The hunting is just the tool we perfected to protect everything else. The building, the exploring, the composing, the healing, the laughing at silly owl videos with our grandmothers." Phelan leaned forward slightly, and for the first time Professor Loram saw not a predator, but a protector. And it was infinitely more terrifying. "We're not the perfect predator, Professor. We're the galaxy's most stubborn, overprotective, and lethally capable family, and you accidentally brought a wolf to our doorstep." The story of the Lyceum incident became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale whispered into military academies, and a subject of frantic study in xenobiology departments. It was the day the galaxy at large stopped seeing humanity as a chaotic species of Deathworld survivors. There was something far older, far more potent. They were the pack that had tamed its Deathworld not by fleeing it, but by teaching it to fear them. And for the first time,